I'm Frank Jr., Virginia's youngest son, and this is my mother's story, a story I never thought I'd have to tell. That evening began like any other. My family was in Belfast, Maine, enjoying the end of summer. My father, Frank Sr., had just retired and was using the time to explore his hobbies, from skiing to playing chess. My mother, a gentle, caring woman, accompanied him on this trip. I still remember clearly the image of my mother entering Rennie's, saying that she needed to use the restroom. That was the last time I saw her. We waited. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. As the time dragged on, anxiety began to creep into my heart, growing stronger. The feeling of unease rose like a wave, covering my mind. My mother was not the type to let things drag on, not the type to skip a family gathering, especially when she was always meticulous, always concerned with every detail of our lives. My father, his face full of tension, entered the store to find my mother. He went through every shelf, asked every employee, but none of them remembered seeing my mother. No one knew where she had gone. Everything seemed suddenly quiet, strangely quiet. My mother disappeared, as if she had been erased from reality, swallowed by an incomprehensible darkness. We could not explain what had happened. Questions began to appear in our minds. How could this be possible? She had just gone to the bathroom. How could she have disappeared so easily? And why had no one seen her go? The answers seemed to be non-existent, leaving only a permanent void where my mother had been. Fear was mounting, but we did not give up. We continued to search, to ask people, but all was silence. And from that moment, our lives changed forever. Not only did we lose our mother, but we also lost faith in what was taken for granted in life. What happened to my mother? Did she leave willingly? Or did someone hurt her? There was no sign of a struggle, no witnesses, just an empty space where Mom used to be. The police were quick to act. Detectives searched every corner of the store, checked the security cameras, questioned everyone around them, but found no trace. All they had was a series of unanswered questions. Where had my mother gone? Why did no one remember seeing her leave the store? What was left but the emptiness and faint traces of a normal day that had suddenly become strange and inexplicable? The searches were extensive. Police forces and even a dog squad were mobilized, but nothing. There were no traces on the surrounding streets. No one noticed anything unusual. It seemed like everything had happened in a short moment, and then she had disappeared into thin air, as if she had never existed. The questions continued, but the answers grew more and more distant. Someone could have harmed my mother, but if so, why was there no trace left? Why had no one heard anything? Or did she leave voluntarily, leaving everything behind without any explanation? Each speculation only made things more obscure. The mysteries grew thicker, unable to be solved. I couldn't help but wonder, was she taken away by force? Or did she leave us all, gone for a reason we couldn't understand? The police did their best, but all their efforts still couldn't solve this mystery. And with each passing day, my mother became more distant, like a ghost still wandering in our memories. During the investigation, we were confronted with the truth about my mother and father's lives. Their relationship, although seemingly normal, had cracks that none of us noticed. My father was busy with his own interests, leaving my mother alone at home. She became isolated, but she never complained. I wonder if that loneliness led her to leave the family. Or is it just our speculation in an attempt to find answers? The days after my mother's disappearance were the most difficult of my life. Every morning when I woke up, I was immersed in endless thoughts about her. Was she suffering? Was she so scared and worried that she couldn't call for help? Or was someone harming her, causing her life to end abruptly and cruelly? Every unanswered question swirled around my mind, making me feel like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My family was also divided between hope and despair. My father, who I had always seen as a strong pillar, now became absent-minded, blaming himself. Did he do something wrong? Could he do anything to change things? The feeling of guilt had enveloped him, making him increasingly silent, no longer the strong man I once knew. My sister, Ginny, tried to be strong, tried to keep the family from collapsing, but I knew, no matter how strong she appeared, her pain was no different from mine. Every time she smiled, I saw sadness in her eyes. She never said it, but I knew she couldn't understand what had happened to our mother. Everything seemed to quietly crumble within us, and the questions followed, not allowing us to forget the pain. We live in silence, not because we don't want to speak, but because we don't know what to say. We've lost the most important woman in our family, and now all that's left is emptiness and an unspeakable pain. Anything we thought was certain is now uncertain, and I wonder if my family will ever have peace again, while my mother remains missing, a memory lost in space. Years have passed, and the mystery of my mother's disappearance remains unsolved. Every time I return to Maine, I feel like she's still out there, waiting for us. I can't stop looking. But the truth is, we may never know what happened. I tell this story not only to keep my mother's memory alive, but also to remind everyone that behind every small town, every family, there are secrets, pains that we cannot see. And sometimes, that darkness never goes away. September 1, 1988, was the beginning of our family's never-ending nightmare. My mother, a woman with a kind heart and gentle eyes, disappeared without a trace. Today, I tell this story not only to honor my mother, but also to seek the truth. On that fateful evening, my parents decided to do something rare, take a spontaneous trip. After more than 46 years of marriage, my mother, Virginia, convinced my father, Frank, to plan a weekend getaway. Maybe she wanted to remind him that she still knew how to enjoy life, or maybe she just wanted to escape the feeling of being forgotten. They chose Bar Harbor, Maine, a place known for its natural beauty, and Acadia National Park. They set off on their journey around 8:30 p.m. in their dark blue 1987 Oldsmobile Cutlass. Their journey would take about 5 to 6 hours, but they were in no hurry. My parents even stopped at the South Portland Motor Inn for the night before continuing their journey the next morning. The next day, September 2, my parents stopped in Belfast, Maine, around 5:30 p.m. My father parked in the parking lot of the Rennie's department store so my mother could use the restroom. Everything seemed normal, but that was the last time he saw my mother. My father waited in the car, but as 10 and 15 minutes passed, he began to worry. Maybe she was waiting or had decided to wander around the store, he thought. Still, the uneasiness continued to grow. He decided to leave a note on the steering wheel in case she returned, and then went inside to look for her. But my mother wasn't in the restroom. He searched the aisles, but she wasn't there either. Returning to the car, my father noticed that my mother's purse was still in the front seat, containing money, credit cards, and the eye drops she needed to use 4 times a day. She would never leave such important things behind. Time continued to pass. This time, my father decided to go back inside with more determination. He went through every aisle, asking every person, but no one had seen my mother. He asked the store clerk to make an announcement over the loudspeaker, but still there was no response. At 6:45 p.m., with no other choice, my father called the police. I still remember his trembling voice as he recounted the incident. It was not just fear, but also helplessness, a feeling that he had lost the woman he loved all his life. When I think about that night, everything seems like a maze with no way out. With each passing moment, the hope of finding my mother faded. But the question that always haunts me is, what happened to her? Who or what took her away from us? My mother, Virginia Douglas, a woman always radiant and full of life, mysteriously disappeared that evening, leaving a void in our family that could not be filled. The story began in a small Rennie's shop in Belfast, where she walked in saying she needed to use the toilet. It was a normal evening, with no sign of the tragedy that awaited us. When she did not return after more than half an hour, my father and I began to feel uneasy. My father rushed into the shop to look for her, but no one in the shop remembered seeing her. She disappeared as if she had never been there. Everything became more unusual and frightening than ever. The police arrived shortly after receiving the news. They launched a massive search operation covering the entire area around Rennie's store. The small streets, the dense bushes, and every corner of the store were thoroughly searched. They also mobilized professional search dogs and teams, but the results were disappointing. There was no sign of my mother, Virginia Douglas. In the following days, the police continued to expand the search area. Abandoned houses, nearby rivers, and even deep forests were searched. However, no matter how great the effort, everything led to a dead end. No trace, no witnesses, no clue as to what happened to her. Our family was in a nightmare. Those days, I felt like time had stopped, leaving only a dull pain in my heart. My mother, the woman who had always brought light to our lives, had now disappeared as if she had been erased from the world, and we, the ones left behind, could only live in helplessness and thousands of unanswered questions. Store employees were called in for questioning. Several recalled seeing a woman matching my mother's description that night, but no one could be sure. One witness even claimed to have seen a woman who looked like my mother walking west on Route 3, but the accounts were contradictory, and the timing and circumstances did not match. Investigators could not determine which was true. For the first 3 days, search parties scoured every nook and cranny. My father, Frank, could not sit still. He hired a private search party, with dogs, to comb the wooded areas behind the store. My father even left my mother's car exactly where she had last been seen, hoping that if she returned, she would recognize him and find him. A person was also posted next to the car 24/7, but all in vain. The police circulated photos of my mother, appealing to the public for any information. My father called every hospital, every shelter, and contacted every relative. But nothing came of it. Time passed, and hope began to fade. One day, a neighbor of ours received a call from a psychic who claimed my mother was still inside Rennie's. My father, in desperation, convinced the manager to open on Labor Day, even though it was a holiday. Together with the manager and 2 employees, my father searched every nook and cranny, clearing out every box, checking every storage room, even the roof. But once again, they came up empty-handed. My mother vanished into thin air, leaving no trace. It was an event that I still cannot comprehend, even though I try to recall every moment of that fateful evening. She walked into Rennie's, and then, as if the world had swallowed her, there was not a trace left. For my father, it was not just the loss of his partner, but also a battle with himself. He spent months endlessly searching, asking questions, trying to connect every little detail he could remember. He searched every corner for hope, however small, in the hope of finding his wife. But every time hope flickered, the cruel reality extinguished it, leaving him in silence and despair. My father never gave up hope. I remember him sitting for hours in the living room, staring at the picture of my mother, as if praying that she would walk through the door and smile at us once more. But time did not stood by us, and the unanswered questions gradually became a burden that the family had to bear. For us, this mystery remains a wound that will never heal. And I tell this story not only to share the pain, but also to inspire hope. Hope that one day, someone, somewhere, will know what really happened to my mother, Virginia Douglas. Perhaps the answer is still out there, waiting to be discovered. Until then, all we can do is hold on to our memories, so that the image of our mother will always live in our hearts. I still remember every detail of those days. Each moment seems to be etched into my mind, indelibly. The Belfast police immediately launched an investigation into the disappearance of my mother, Virginia Douglas. They began by retracing my parents' footsteps, trying to reconstruct their journey since they left home that fateful Thursday night. According to my father, their first stop was a small motel in South Portland. That's where he said they spent the night. The next morning, they had breakfast in peace, unaware that just a few hours later, our world would be turned upside down. The police searched the motel thoroughly, interviewing staff and guests, but found no signs of anything unusual. My father insisted that everything was normal. However, that normalcy did not last long. After breakfast, they set off for Belfast, where my mother's mysterious disappearance occurred. Rennie's, where my mother said she needed to go to the bathroom, became the center of the investigation. But despite a thorough search, the police could not find any trace of my mother. She seemed to have vanished into thin air, leaving behind not even the slightest clue. Whenever I think about that trip, I wonder, was there something my father didn't say? Was there some detail we missed? The police did everything they could, but the answer remained elusive, just like my mother, who had disappeared without a word. But this is where the chain of contradictions began. No one, not even the motel staff, remembered seeing my mother. A hotel receptionist confirmed that my father had arrived sometime after 11 p.m. on September 1, but could not confirm that he had been with my mother. Nor did they remember seeing her the next morning when my father left, which raises a new and haunting question. What prompted this strange and impromptu trip? My father explained that the night before they left, they had had an argument. He said he had been watering the lawn, then gone inside to use the bathroom. When he returned, he found the door locked. As he was trying to open it, my mother appeared, clearly angry. My father insisted that it was an accident, but my mother accused him of doing it on purpose. My father described my mother as having mood swings. He said she could sometimes go from happy to sad in a split second. After the tension had passed, he suggested a spontaneous trip to Maine to calm things down. According to him, this was not the first time my mother had disappeared after an argument. He recalled an incident 25 years ago when my mother had left home for a few days in New York after a family argument before returning. But this time was different. My mother had taken nothing with her, no wallet, no credit cards, not even the eye drops. She needed to use 4 times a day to keep her eyes healthy. They were still in her bag, found in the back seat of my father's car. That was not something my mother would do. She was always careful, thoughtful, and would never leave something so important behind. My father, when asked about this, stressed to the police. She would never leave without these things. This was not a voluntary trip. His voice was filled with anxiety, each word like a plea, wanting someone to listen and understand that this was not a normal event. The police took note, but no one seemed to be able to come up with any satisfactory explanation. The items left behind were clear evidence that my mother had no intention of leaving us. That only added to the mystery and anxiety, as the question, what really happened to my mother, kept repeating itself in our heads day after day, relentlessly. The story became even more confusing when investigators failed to find any concrete evidence that placed my mother at any location after she was said to have entered the motel. Every lead fell on deaf ears, and our family was left in endless confusion and pain. The dim light in the room made everything stifling. The house that was once filled with laughter and warmth now seemed to have turned into a gloomy place. Every little corner reminded me of my mother's absence. The pictures on the wall, the sweaters my mother used to wear were still neatly hung in the closet, all whispering, "Where did you go, Mom?" My father, the person I once considered a solid support, was now just a quiet shadow. He sat there, next to the chair my mother used to sit on to knit, his eyes sad and empty. Every gesture, every word of his evoked a feeling of regret and helplessness. He tried to maintain a strong appearance, but in his eyes, I saw a man gradually sinking into an unnameable pain. And my mother, her disappearance, was still the biggest, strangest question. There was no trace, no explanation. We didn't know where to start or how to search. The house was filled with memories of my mother, but her presence was only a vague shadow, making me feel as if the space around us was gradually shrinking, suffocating the remaining hope in our hearts. "We were a normal family," I began, my voice unable to hide the confusion. "At least I thought so." But when the detectives started investigating, things seemed to change from what they seemed. When I asked the neighbors, they showed me a flat picture, a normal family, sometimes arguing, sometimes showing affection. But I felt something was wrong, perhaps because I had lived with them for so long and knew better than anyone the cracks in that peaceful appearance. Marilyn's words were like a sharp knife cutting through the silence. She looked at me, her eyes shining with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "He never really understood, Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "She was more than just a wife, a mother. She was the one who kept this family together, the one who held us all together. But he never saw that." I didn't know how to respond. Her words confused me, because I had felt something similar but had never dared to admit it. Mom had always been our rock, but her strength and devotion had often been overshadowed by Dad's. "Marilyn, maybe he loved Mom in his own way," I managed, though my voice sounded shaky. "He just didn't know how to show it." Marilyn sneered, her eyes flashing with bitterness. "Is it worth it to love without respect? Dad always decides everything, as if Mom has no say. And Mom, she just tolerates it, as if it's normal. But it's not. No one deserves that." Her words weighed heavily on me. Mom's disappearance was not only a mystery, but also the exposure of cracks in our family, things we had previously avoided. But now, it all came to the surface, leaving behind emotions that could not be denied or avoided. After Dad retired, things began to change. Dad was no longer the same. Mom became lonely, while Dad was more active than ever, playing tennis, forgetting the dinners she had prepared. That was something I always remembered. Mom was very sad about it, and she sat with me many times talking about that loneliness, watching Dad just leave without saying a word. "I don't understand, honey," Mom said, her eyes red from crying. "Dad didn't spend time with me anymore. I felt like I was the only one left in the house. Although I began to have suspicions about Dad, there was nothing concrete to prove that anything bad had happened to Mom. Until the police got involved. We checked the Douglas's car very carefully, the policeman said, his voice serious. We found a piece of carpet and traces of mud, but no blood. And then, I can never forget the moment when the detectives discovered this strange thing. As they explored the Rennie department store, things got even stranger. Dad, shortly after reporting Mom missing, had bought women's underwear. One employee said he even asked a female employee about her underwear size because she looked like Mom. This was not normal. And then, the detective continued, we found that just an hour later, he returned to the store and bought more underwear. All the while, he was still looking for his wife. What Dad had done made me feel uncomfortable, unable to believe my eyes. Why would he do such things while Mom was missing? And when the police checked the suitcase, Mom had supposedly packed for a weekend trip. They discovered a heartbreaking truth. There were new underwear in the suitcase, but none of Mom's old underwear. What did Dad pack for Mom? Did Mom forget to pack her own underwear? Or did Dad do something very strange? Dad told the police that he bought the underwear as a good omen, hoping that Mom would come back. But I knew that something was wrong. The good omen could be an act. Dad hid the information until the police found out themselves. So the question remained, where had Mom gone? And was Dad really involved in her disappearance? Everything was still hazy, but I couldn't help but suspect that something was very wrong in this family. The story of my mother's disappearance has haunted me for years. It's like a shadow, constantly following me and weighing me down. I remember clearly the day my sister Ginny returned from Belfast after a long trip looking for my mother. Her face was pale and tired, her eyes were empty, as if she had left a part of herself there. When Ginny walked through the door of our house in Lexington, Massachusetts, I could feel the change, not just in my sister, but in the atmosphere of the house. Everything felt heavier, quieter, as if the walls were holding a secret that no one dared to reveal. Ginny put her suitcase on the floor, not saying a word for the first few minutes. Finally, she sat down in a chair, covered her face with her hands, and said in despair, "Nothing. Not a clue. Mom just vanished into thin air." Her words froze me. Even though I knew the situation, I still couldn't get used to the fact that Mom was gone, that we didn't know where she was or what had happened to her. Ginny tried to tell me what she had done, where she had searched, but each story only deepened the pain inside me. "I went to every corner of Rennie's," she said, her voice breaking. "I asked every employee, every customer I could. No one knew anything. The police did everything, but Mom was still missing." Every word Ginny spoke was like a knife cutting into my heart. Our house in Lexington, once filled with laughter and Mom's warmth, felt emptier than ever. Every corner, every object reminded me of her, of the days before everything changed forever. As soon as she entered our house, a strange feeling came over her. The house was no longer the same. The windows were wide open, the curtains were drawn, and the refrigerator was full of food, as if someone had left in a hurry. But my mother, Virginia, was a very careful person, always worried about the house, always making sure everything was in order. She would never leave a window open without a reason, and especially never leave food behind without a good reason. That made Ginny think. My mother was not a wasteful person, and if she went out, she would make sure to check the windows and lock the doors carefully. But then, the events of that day became even stranger. Virginia and my father, Frank, had left very late the night before. Ginny had only come home an hour after work, which was really unlike my mother. Virginia would always wait for Ginny to come home, always greet her even if it was just a goodbye. A close friend of my mother's said this, that Virginia was always very careful about time, always arranging to be home when she knew Ginny would be home. But then things really started the following week. After returning from work, Ginny discovered something horrifying. Blood. Blood stains on the living room carpet, and on it was my mother's blood type. Blood clots. My mother's hair falling near the back door. All these details made Ginny unable to sit still. She immediately contacted the police. The police later examined and confirmed the traces. My mother's blood, Virginia, and pieces of her hair all raised the question, where had my mother gone? And why were there signs of violence in this house? Everything seemed too difficult to explain. My mother's disappearance, possible death, or just some incident, all were just theories. Frank, my father, was perhaps the only one who remained silent, but this only added to the confusion. Did he have anything to do with my mother's disappearance? Was fatigue, the stress of their marriage, the reason behind it all? But what broke my heart the most was how Frank Jr. stood up for his father, even though we, the children, had received no attention from our father while our mother was gone. There had been no phone call, no explanation from our father. Instead, we had to learn the truth from the police. Things got worse when we discovered that the door locks had been changed. Jenny had tried to find clear signs, but there was only a jumble of unclear stories, inconclusive evidence. My mother was missing, and there was no body. There were no clear answers about what had really happened to her. Now, I stand here, telling this story. It is the fragments of memory, of doubt and uncertainty that we have lived with all this time. My mother was missing, and we still have no answers, only traces of her, like ghosts, haunting this house. And I don't know if we will ever know the truth about Virginia. 3 years after my mother's disappearance, in 1991, the police finally named Frank, my father, as a suspect in the case. It was a huge shock to the family. Marilyn and Jenny, my sisters, stopped being silent. They openly shared what they had long believed. They said that my mother's death was not planned, but the result of an accident, an unforeseen event. One of them, I remember clearly, said that she thought that when my father realized what he had done, he was so frightened that he threw away my mother's body. Then he made up a story so unbelievable that no one, not family, friends, or strangers, could believe it. My father made up contradictory stories, but they were not convincing enough. Still, Marilyn and Jenny held on to the belief that one day justice would be served. But the years passed, and there were no arrests or any breakthroughs in the investigation. A decade after my mother disappeared, a detective said the case was one of the strangest he had ever encountered. Investigations continued, but there was no new evidence, no solution to the mystery. Virginia was still missing, and everything remained an unanswered question mark. Frank Douglas, my father, died some time after my mother disappeared. He took all his secrets with him, leaving no trace of what really happened. His life after my mother disappeared remains a mystery. Some say he lived alone in our house, where nothing had changed. It is said that during those years, he lived in the shadow of rumors, in silence, afraid to face the truth. And so, what do you think he did? Virginia Douglas, my grandmother, once went to a Rennie's department store. She was just looking for the bathroom, but then she mysteriously disappeared. The family never saw her again, never at breakfast that morning, never back at the motel. Perhaps her death had been decided long before she decided to make that impromptu Labor Day trip. In the end, the truth remains an untold story, a mystery that will never be solved.